and welcome back to our continued study of Revelation. This video is on Revelation, the Seven Trumpets, Part 1. Revelation 8, 1 through 6. When the Lamb opened the seven seals, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Then I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and seven trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumbling, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Now the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to blow them. Why was there silence in heaven for half an hour? Probably because the seven trumpets are of such significance that the horror of them caused all of heaven to be quiet. I wonder if we understand the horror that is soon to fall upon the earth. The book of Revelation is in constant motion. It isn't a straight telling of chronological order, for there is far too much information to be given at any one time. So when Jesus is giving John the information, he follows a certain train of thought to a logical end. Then he backs up in order to move along another track, another train of thought. Keep in mind, there are multiple events taking place all at the same time. Parallel tracks. Track here, track here. Just as you may have a war going on in 2 or 3 countries all at the same time. You would tell the story of one war at a time. The reader must, by the power of the Holy Spirit, put Revelation all together in order to understand how all the tracks line up and work together. These are 7 trumpets. These are not the 7 last plagues, for those are given starting in Revelation 16. Those plagues are the last because they are poured out without mercy after probation closes. They are the final punishment of the wicked. These 7 trumpets are poured out with mercy, since God is attempting to awake the people and to bring them back to himself. However, these 7 trumpets have 2 distinct prophetic time periods to fulfill. The first is from about the 400 ADs and comes all the way down to the second coming of Christ. Remember, the 7 churches were a quick and easy outline of the history of the spiritual church of God. Being spiritual in its representation, it was easy to describe and explain. You either have right or wrong. Now the seals. The 7 seals are a bit more complicated because they represent society and the results of the spiritual church upon society. A pure church had the protection of God, and society was blessed. As the spiritual church became more and more degraded, the nature of society became more and more degraded and filled with famines, weather and earth-related curses, and sicknesses such as the Black Death. The 7 trumpets become even more detailed and truly bring us down to the coming of Christ. However, this prophecy is the first fulfillment. I believe the next fulfillment is now or soon to be fulfilled, where we will see these 7 trumpets again poured out as warnings to the world just before the close of probation. And why do I believe this? Because the angel told John in Revelation 10, verse 11, which is in the 7th trumpet, that he must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and all languages and kings. Basically, he is saying that it will happen again, but in a shorter, condensed time period, something we will be able to see happening around us, probably in more literal time. Trumpets in the Bible refer most often to calling to war. They were used for signaling and alerting the people and the troops to dangers that were approaching. The trumpets of Revelation have the same purpose. They are to call the people of the earth to attention. They signal to alert the people and the troops of God what will happen in the future. As such, the trumpets deal with signaling, warning, war, and conquest. Remember, every Christian is in a war. Let us never forget our calling. The angel takes the censer and throws it to the earth. Basically, it is a wake-up call. Wake up, he is saying. The first 4 trumpets deal with the military defeat of Western Rome. Since Rome was the nation at the time John was writing Revelation, it is only logical that God would be giving him a look at what would happen to that great nation which persecuted his people. After all, that is why John was on the Isle of Patmos. He was being persecuted for his faith. Therefore, Rome, would also be persecuted. The first trumpet, basically AD 395 to AD 419. Revelation 8:7. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. And 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. This curse, the hail, fire mixed with blood, represented the Goths under the rulership of Alaric in their fight against Western Rome. Alaric was the leader of the Visigoth mercenaries in the Roman army. He rebelled and was proclaimed king by his troops. He led his army toward Constantinople, which was the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire, and then into Greece, where he took increasing advantage of the divisions between the eastern and western halves of the empire. In 397, the emperor in the east gave Alaric military command of Illyria. Today, that area is called the Balkans, from which he staged an invasion of Italy. His first 2 sieges of Rome were ended by negotiation, but in 410 he stormed and devastated the city. The capture of Rome signaled the final decline of the Roman Empire in the West. Let us look at this map, and you will find that Alaric caused immense amount of trouble to 1/3 of the Roman Empire. You might say he was a pain in the back for 1/3 of the then known world, the world as John would have understood it. The area that Alaric fought over was filled with trees and grass. Here you can see pictures of some of the areas he fought over. Understanding the geography makes it easier to understand the metaphors of the first trumpet. The second trumpet, AD 419 to AD 456. Revelation 8:8. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain, burning with fire, was thrown into the sea. And 1/3 of the sea became blood, 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. This curse is a bit more powerful than the first trumpet. Whereas the first trumpet was just some hail mixed with fire, this trumpet is a great mountain that is burned with fire, and it was thrown into the sea, with 1/3 of the sea becoming blood. You will notice the progression of the curses getting more and more terrible as the condition of the 7 churches that we have studied earlier becomes spiritually worse and worse. Gesseric was the founder of the Vandal kingdom of North Africa. Gesseric succeeded his brother Gunderic as king of the Vandals and Alans in 428. In 429, he led his people from Spain into North Africa, which he gradually conquered from the Romans taking its chief city, Carthage, in 439. In 442, the Western Roman Emperor, Valentinian III, recognized him as ruler of a kingdom that included most of what is now Tunisia and part of Algeria. In later years, Genseric dominated the western Mediterranean with a powerful fleet, adding Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, and the Balearic Islands to his conquest. He plundered Rome itself in 455. In 468, he defeated an expedition sent against him by the Eastern Roman Emperor Leo I. First, we see this is a burning mountain thrown into the sea. Nothing green about it. North Africa, where the Vandal kingdom ruled, isn't very green or wooded with trees. Here, you can see some pictures of the area he ruled. Thrown into the sea. As we read, Genseric dominated the western Mediterranean Sea with a powerful sea-faring fleet. He destroyed navies that were sent against him and conquered islands, thereby fulfilling the prophecy. Bible prophecy is amazing when we carefully study it alongside history and geography. Let us look at the map to see the area of his rule. The third trumpet, AD 434 to AD 476. Revelation 8:10. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. And it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. In the first two trumpets, it doesn't talk about people dying, for the conquest of Alaric and Genseric were more about land and position in a narrow geographic location. The battles they fought were limited and specific to warriors more than civilians. However, when we get to the third trumpet, we are not just talking about a specific battle or war. We are talking about a total devastation of cities, countries, and peoples. And who would do that? Attila the Hun. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila the Hun was a ruthless Asian conqueror who invaded Europe during the last years of the Roman Empire. In 434, Attila and his brother Bled became joint rulers of the Huns, a fierce nomadic tribe. In and around about 445, Attila murdered Bled so he could rule the Huns all by himself. Attila showed no mercy to those he defeated. He left many cities burning with piles of corpses in their wake. Constantinople narrowly escaped destruction at his hands. In 452, Attila laid siege to Rome, the city that he most wanted to destroy. However, he was forced to withdraw because his army was ravaged by hunger and disease. When the Huns came into contact with the various peoples living in South Russia, they either conquered them or sent them fleeing into the Roman Empire. This caused substantial dislocation and helped them gain a fearsome reputation in the West. The great Hun leader, Attila, took control of the horde in AD 434. He obtained vast monetary tribute from the Romans and devastated large parts of the empire for almost 2 decades before his death in 453. Attila the Hun was a wild madman. The biblical description as wormwood would not be too far off. Many people died from the waters that had become bitter. He made the waters bitter by his conduct. You might say his conduct was very odious. Keep in mind, waters in the Bible represent nations. Wormwood is a plant. The plant's characteristic odor can make it useful for making a plant spray against pests. It is used in companion planting to suppress weeds because its roots secrete substances that inhibit the growth of surrounding plants. It can repel insect larvae when planted on the edge of cultivated areas. It has also been used to repel fleas and moths indoors. What a perfect description of the Huns. Wherever they went, they repelled people, villages, and nations before them. Just the thought of them brought terror to people, and their presence inhibited the growth of society. They were a nomadic tribe that had no idea how to govern a stable, civilized city or nation. They lived, hunted, and carried on war from the backs of their horses. Again, looking at the metaphor as a star falling from heaven, we find it fits the Huns very well. The Huns did not arise from or come from within the Roman Empire, but came from without, as a star falling from outside the earth. As you can see from the map, the area the Huns ruled was quite large and was threatening the northern territories of the Roman Empire. Their territory also encompassed great bodies of rivers and springs of water, as the pictures here show. The fourth trumpet, AD 476 to the end of Western Rome. Revelation 8:12. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. By the time of this fourth trumpet, John is completely astonished, since he could never have imagined a third of the Roman Empire being destroyed. To John, the Roman Empire was as strong and secure as any mountain. To him, it was as eternal as any earthly thing could be. The Romans, starting as a republic around 509 BC and lasting until 476 AD, were almost 1,000 years as a ruling nation. A Germanic warrior and king of Italy, Odoacer, dethroned the young emperor Romulus Augustulus on August 28, 476, thus bringing the Western Roman Empire to a formal end. Odoacer made few administrative changes in Rome. He recovered Sicily and Dalmatia, threatening the Byzantine Emperor Zeno. In 488, Zeno sponsored the Ostrogoth king Theodoric against Odoacer. Theodoric overran Italy and assassinated Odoacer at a banquet on March 15, 493, a week after Odoacer had surrendered. The end of an empire that had rejected the Son of God was filled with assassinations, revolutions, brutality, and licentiousness. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. This is a fitting description of the termination of Western Roman Empire. When Odoacer conquered Rome, the empire that considered itself to be the representative of the Son of God went black. But it was only a third of the empire. Eastern Rome and North African states were still intact. But the Bible goes on to say, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other three angels." If a person were to think that these minor wars and skirmishes with Rome were significant, be warned. What is to come will even surpass what has come. As the world enlarged by population, more nations were birthed, and the next three trumpets would be compounded in destruction. More peoples, more cities, more nations would be affected, so the destruction becomes greater. The fifth trumpet, the rise of Islam. Revelation 9, 1 through 12. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven fallen onto the earth. And there was given to him the key of the pit of the abyss. And he opened the pit of the abyss, and there went up a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And out of the smoke came forth locusts upon the earth, and power was given them, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was said unto them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only such men as have not the seal of God on their foreheads. And it was given them that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it striketh a man. And in those days men shall seek death, and shall in no wise find it, and they shall desire to die, and death fleeth from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared for war, and upon their heads, as it were, crowns like unto gold, and their faces were as men's faces, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses rushing to war, and they have tails like unto scorpions, and stings, and in their tails is their power to hurt men 5 months. They have over them as king the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek tongue he hath the name Apollyon. The first woe is past. Behold, there are yet 2 woes hereafter. Between 572 and 628, the Middle East was the scene of warfare between the Byzantines and the Persian Empire of the Sassanines. Keep in mind, we get our word assassin from these Persians. In 614, Jerusalem fell to the Persians, and by 619, Egypt as well. Under the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, the imperial armies succeeded in counterattacking and defeating the Persians decisively by 628. Both empires were left drained and weakened by this 50-year period of intermittent warfare. Now this is important, because they were thus ill prepared to meet a new threat which appeared from Arabia, an area that had never before been of importance in Middle Eastern history. And what was that threat, which the 5th trumpet gives so much descriptive and destructive language to? Mecca was the birthplace of the man who was to become known as the Prophet Muhammad. In the year 610, Muhammad had the first of many experiences that he came to understand as divine revelations, calling upon him to preach to his people a monotheistic religion based on the worship of the one God, the belief in a day of judgment, and the giving of alms for the support of the poor. And he opened the pit of the abyss, and there went up a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. If you have been to Saudi Arabia, you would understand the metaphor perfectly. It is the pit of the world, and truly, it is as hot as a great furnace. Now you understand the star that fell. Again, Arabia was outside of the notice of the Roman Empire. And the leader is the devil. He gave the visions to Muhammad. Persecuted in Mecca, Muhammad and his early converts migrated northward in 622 to the agricultural oasis of Medina, which was inhabited by 3 Jewish tribes as well as several pagan Arab tribes. There Muhammad was no longer an outcast, but was recognized by many as a prophet of God and the leader of a community that regarded him as a lawgiver, judge, and military leader. At his death in 632, this community, which he left, had a religion which was called Islam, and the believers were called Muslims. The migration to Medina in 622 was regarded as the beginning of the Muslim era. At Medina, Muhammad won acceptance as a religious and military leader. Within a few years, he had established control of the surrounding region, and in 630, he finally conquered Mecca. There, the Kaaba, a shrine that had for some time housed the idols of the pagan Meccans, was rededicated to the worship of Allah, and it became the object of pilgrimage for all Muslims. By the time of his death in 632, Muhammad had won the allegiance of most of the Arab people to Islam. He had laid the foundation for a community ruled by the laws of their God. As you can see from the historical account above, the Islamic religion did what the Christian religion did. It took pagan idols, a rock, and objects of worship and Christianized them, and they dedicated them to the worship of the one God. But it is all paganism. Nowhere in the Bible are we allowed to worship a stone at Mecca, or an image in a Catholic church, or the teachings of man in any church or denomination. You can see from the picture the worship that is given to the rock. Do you see the people? They are going around the black object. That black object is the tent that covers the rock they are worshiping. By 661, Damascus was their capital. A second wave of expansion followed. After they conquered Tunisia in 670, Muslim troops reached the northwestern point of North Africa in 710. In 711, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, rapidly overran Spain, and penetrated well into France until they were turned back in 732. On the northern frontier, Constantinople was besieged more than once, though without success, and in the east, the Indus River was reached. The Islamic Empire now bordered China and India with some settlements in the Punjab. Islam had now arisen and became another false teaching by another false prophet, by another false religion. The devil is always attempting to draw man's eyes away from the truth with man-made opinions, religions, churches, denominations, and beliefs. The description of the Muslims as locusts and scorpions is quite accurate. They became very numerous, and their armies moved across the desert like locusts, devouring everything in their path. And like scorpions, they were constantly stinging everyone in their path, even themselves. How true the biblical prophecy that Ishmael, the brother of Isaac, would not be able to live at peace with his brothers. The Islamic nations are constantly at war with each other, even today. The other metaphor, darkening the sky, is also very accurate. Their religion is darkening the souls of men and leading them to the abyss. The 5 months they were to torment is also accurate. They would torment the so-called Christian Eastern Roman Empire for 150 years. They could not conquer it, but torment it they did. Remember, a day in prophecy is a year in real time. 30 days to a month brings us to 150 years. Basically, the Islamic nation tormented the Christian Byzantine Empire from 1299 to 1449. Let us take a look at the map and see the extent of the Islamic nation up to this time. Revelation 9:13 to 21. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the horns of the golden altar, which is before God, one saying to the sixth angel that had one trumpet, Loose the 4 angels that are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed that had been preparing for the hour and day and month and year, that they should kill the 3rd part of men. And the number of the armies of the horsemen was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates, as of fire, and of jacinth, and of brimstone, and the heads of lions, and out of their mouths proceeded fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 plagues was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which proceeded out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails are like unto serpents, and have heads, and with them they hurt. And the rest of mankind, who were not killed with these plagues, repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons, and the idols of gold, and of silver, and of brass, and of stone, and of wood, which can neither see, nor hear, nor walk. And they repented not of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Out of the Islamic faith came a very powerful empire, the Ottoman Empire ruled over much of what once was the Eastern Roman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a Muslim Turkish state that encompassed Anatolia, southeastern Europe, and the Arab Middle East and North Africa from the 14th to the early 20th century. It succeeded both the Byzantine Empire, whose capital, Constantinople, which today is modern Istanbul, it made its own in 1453, and the Arab Caliphate, whose mantle of descent from Muhammad it claimed after conquest of Egypt in 1517. The Ottoman Empire was finally broken up at the end of World War I when its heartland of Anatolia became the Republic of Turkey. And when you read the history and see the breastplates and the armor the military used in their battles, you will see a correlation between them and what is written in this prophecy. As gunpowder began to be used for war, you can see a correlation, for out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. And of course, sulfur is an ingredient of gunpowder, and it made a lot of smoke and fire back then. That's why it was called black powder. Tremendous devastation took place during these wars. But more important than just wars between nations, these wars had to do with religion and religious ideology. That is why they are recorded in the Bible. God is only concerned about one thing, the maintaining of His truth. Up to this time, the angels had kept the Muslim religion bound at the great river Euphrates. In other words, kept to the Middle East, Arabian Desert, and North Africa. But on July 22, 1449, the lawful successor to the Greek, so-called Christian, Byzantine Empire, refused to ascend the throne without permission from the Turkish or Ottoman Sultan. Thus it was that on that date, the Byzantine Empire surrendered its power. This was not a violent assault made on the Greeks, by which their empire was overthrown and their independence taken away, but simply a voluntary surrender of that independence into the hands of the Turks by saying, "I cannot reign unless you permit me to." The empire reached its peak in the 16th century. Sultan Selim I conquered Egypt and Syria, gained control of the Arabian Peninsula, and beat back the rulers of Iran at the Battle of Clarendon in 1514. He was succeeded by Suleiman I, also known as the Magnificent, who took Iraq, Hungary, and Albania, and established Ottoman naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. Suleiman codified and institutionalized the classic structure of the Ottoman state and society, making his dominion into one of the great powers of Europe. The proverbial Euphrates River would no longer be a barrier to the Muslim armies. They now entered into Europe and became a mighty world power. They crossed into Europe and struck right at the gates of Vienna. The extent of their rule was almost a third of the then known world. In real terms, it was Christianity against Islam, a real spiritual battle. Remember, during this time, the Crusades were also taking place. From July 22, 1449, it would reign until the Bible said it would cease to have power. That happened 391 years, 15 days later, as stated in Revelation 9:15, which says, "For this very hour and day and month and year." A day equals a year in prophecy, and an hour would be 15 days. Add it all up in prophetic time, and you have 391 years and 15 days. How did this happen? By this time, the Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe, and European diplomacy focused on the so-called Eastern question, how to dispose of the sick man's territories without upsetting the European balance of power. Now, that's very important. The Ottoman Empire was sick. It got into a war with Egypt and was left without any real power to solve the problem. It was falling apart. It needed help to solve this war with Egypt. England, Austria, Russia, and Prussia came to the rescue. They became the protectorates of the Ottoman Empire on August 11, 1840. when Egypt accepted their ultimatum on that day. Here we have prophecy again being exactly fulfilled as prophesied. 390 years, 15 days, from July 22, 1449 to August 11, 1840. God is the ruler of the heavens and the earth. He knows what will happen in advance. All we have to do is just sit back and live His righteous, perfect, sinless life and leave the driving to Him. You can see why there is so much hatred for the West by Islam. The Muslims used to be a great empire until the Western nations divided it up. Even after all the devastation, all the wars, and the prophecy that predicted it, the nations still refuse, as the prophecy said they would, to give up their false religions and beliefs. Men and nations are still clinging to their godless, human beliefs, systems, forms, and churches. We have now finished Revelation, the 7 trumpets, part 1. In part 2 of the 7 trumpets, we will continue with the prophecy and see where it leads. Thank you for joining us for this study. God bless you as you live in obedience to His word. Remember, you can trust prophecy. It always comes true.